You all might think that with the Seder and Passover strictly behind us now, that the Jewish holidays are going to be over for a while. And yet, I want to tell you, there are some remarkable events, 4 of them, that are going to take place in the life of our people in the next 11 days. The first event happens on Monday, April 24th, 3 days from now, when we commemorate the most horrible period in Jewish history with Yom Hashoah, a day dedicated to the Holocaust. Most of our holidays, Jewish holidays, well, they share something in common. They either express gratitude or they express a love of God. But what exactly are we supposed to express on Yom HaShoah? Let me share with you a little of the background about how this holiday came about. I hope you'll find it of interest. You see, when the Israeli government was deciding on what day to designate it Yom HaShoah, there was a dispute. That probably doesn't surprise any of you. The rabbinate wanted it to be on one of the existing minor fast days. We were already fasting, make Yom HaShoah an additive to one of those days. But the survivors felt differently. They felt, because of the enormity of the horror, that there should be a day that was exclusively set aside for Yom HaShoah. Some Israelis, primarily it turns out secular Israelis, wanted something different. They wanted April 19th because April 19th was the day of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. That's the day it was launched, April 19th, 1943. April 19th was rejected. First of all, it corresponds to the 15th of Nisan, which is the first day of Passover. But nevertheless, the idea of fighting back had an impact. So much of an impact that the day is not called Yom HaShoah in Israel. The day is called Yom HaShoah v'Hagvurah, the day of remembrance of the Holocaust and of Gevurah, of strength, of courage. But there are no rituals on how to observe this holiday. So Jews, especially Jews in the diaspora, were not exactly sure what to do. Not though in Israel. You see, on Sunday, the night before, on sundown, a siren blows, and then again at 11 o'clock the next morning. The sirens are sounded for 2 minutes, and everything stops, and everybody stops. Wherever they are, in their homes, in their offices, if they're driving, they get out of their cars, and everybody stands at attention. Movies, theaters, bars, and a lot of public arenas are often closed. And now let me share with you something absolutely remarkable. 2 days ago, just 2 days ago, day before yesterday, on Wednesday morning, over 10,000 young Jews, almost all high school seniors from around the world, flew to Poland. This includes a delegation of about 180 high school seniors. There are survivors on the trip too, but 180 high school seniors from Los Angeles. The majority of those high school seniors from LA are graduates of Milken Community High School, and the majority of them are undoubtedly graduates of our Wise School. It's called the March of the Living, and it began in 1988, and this is the 29th group to go. They all arrived in Poland, some in Warsaw, some in Krakow. There's too many to go in one place. And this morning, in Poland, they all toured concentration camps. And on Monday, the day after tomorrow, in Poland it's already Saturday, but on Monday for us and Monday there, on Yom Hashoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, these 10,000 high school seniors will gather in Auschwitz. Among them will be survivors. And many of these young people and survivors will wrap themselves in large Israeli flags. And they will walk the 1.8 miles from Auschwitz to Birkenau. My son Daniel is among them. Which leads me to the second point. The second event that occurs has to do with a young girl named Muriel Roberts and her even younger sister, Margaret Roberts. When Muriel, the older sister, was a little girl, she had a pen pal named Edith Muhlbauer. Edith was a 17-year-old living in Austria. It was 1938, and the Nazis had started rounding up Jews in Vienna. Edith knew at 17 that it was a matter of time before she and her family would be among them. She asked her pen pal, Muriel, who was living in England, if she could help her escape from Austria. The Roberts family, though, in England didn't have much money. So Muriel and her sister Margaret started raising money from the local Rotary Club to help. Not only did they get their young pen pal friend Edith out of Austria, they took Edith into their home for 2 years, and she slept in Margaret's room. Many years later, Margaret wrote memoirs, and in her memoirs she writes of the impact of learning from Edith what it was like to live as a Jew under an anti-Semitic regime. She wrote that the memory that most stuck in her mind was the picture of Jews who were forced to scrub the streets. And as far as I know, Edith, this Austrian girl, is still living. She's a grandmother in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And Margaret Roberts, who helped save her and with whom she shared her room for those 2 years, Margaret sadly passed away and was buried on April 17, 2013. You actually know Margaret Roberts. You know a lot about her. You know a lot about her accomplishments, but you know her by another name. You see, Margaret Roberts became Margaret Thatcher. And the morning after she died, the Wall Street Journal published a piece by Paul Johnson. Paul Johnson is, to my mind, the greatest living historian. He's a man in his late 90s now, probably. He lives in England. He's written a book called Intellectuals. He's written a book called The History of the Jews, The History of Christianity. He wrote an extraordinary history from 1900 till the late 1990s called Modern Times. This is a man who is very selective with his words. He is an extraordinary historian. So when you know he's picky about his words, you'll appreciate when he writes in the Wall Street Journal the day after Margaret Thatcher died. This is how he began his piece. Margaret Thatcher had more impact on the world than any woman ruler since Catherine the Great of Russia. So this great woman who had so much impact on the world, when she was asked in an interview, Margaret Thatcher was asked what was the proudest moment of her life. You can imagine all the world leaders she met with. You can imagine all the things she was involved with in England and beyond. You can imagine the many things she might have replied. But she said that the proudest moment of her life was saving a Jewish teenager during the Holocaust. And she remained an outspoken supporter of Israel throughout her life. Which takes me to the third event. The third event is going to occur a week from Monday. It's Memorial Day in Israel, Yom HaZikaron. Yom HaZikaron is the day that Israelis dedicate to their fallen soldiers. And the observance starts, as do every Jewish holiday, the night before. And at 8 p.m. Sunday night, a week from Sunday, a siren will be sounded for 1 minute throughout the country. And once again, Israelis will stop and stand silently. And it's a custom among many Jews to pray for their souls of their departed soldiers. The official ceremony begins at the Western Wall, when the flag of Israel is lowered to half-staff. And the next morning at 11 o'clock, a siren is rung yet again. This time it sounded for 2 minutes. And many Israelis spend their day visiting loved ones at the cemetery. And radio and television stations broadcast programs about the lives and the heroic deeds of the soldiers who were killed, and their somber songs played all day. Virtually every Israeli is related to somebody who died fighting a war in Israel. Ponder that just for a moment. Virtually every Israeli is related to someone who was killed in a war defending Israel. And that very night, at the end of Yom HaZikaron, at the end of the day that Israel remembers her fallen soldiers, that very night a new holiday will begin. The fourth event, Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day, commemorating the day that Israel declared her statehood. It corresponds to the date of May 14th, 1948 in the Hebrew calendar. And on Monday night, just after sundown, the flag of Mount Herzl in Jerusalem will be raised from half-staff to the top of the pole, and a torch will be lit, Hadlakat Masuot. And there will be parades, and a wonderfully festive atmosphere will pervade everywhere. And in synagogue, they'll recite Hallel, songs of praise to God that are particularly joyful. So in a 24-hour period, Israel goes from the sadness of those who died in defense of the state to the celebration of what they gave their lives for, the living state of Israel. I know that many of you, and I share this, are concerned about the lack of support for Israel. I know that many of you, I'll speak for myself here, I believe we are living in a morally disfigured world when it comes to Israel. And I'm concerned even among many Jews about a lack of support for Israel. But I want to share with you some extraordinary and hopeful news. You know those 10,000 high school seniors that I spoke of just a few minutes ago? On Wednesday of next week, they're going to do something that none of their grandparents, in some cases, or none of their great-grandparents could have ever imagined in their wildest dreams. They will spend a day touring concentration camps that morning. And that night, they will board a plane, and they will fly to Israel, and they will land in Tel Aviv. And if they have done, as all of their predecessors have done in the 28 years before them, when the sun rises, they will pray the Shechechianu, and they will thank God for bringing them for this moment. And on Monday in Israel, on Yom HaZikaron, they will stand with the families of the fallen soldiers and their fellow Jews in Israel. And on Tuesday, on Yom HaAtzmaut, on Israel's Independence Day, they will dance in the streets in celebration of Israel's independence. And once again, they will march. One last time on this trip, they will march. But this time the march is not from Auschwitz to Birkenau. It's not from hell to hell. This march is in the streets of Yerushalayim. and it will end at the Western Wall, the Kotel. This march brings them closer to heaven. And I hope that on Tuesday, as they walk the streets of Jerusalem, I hope in some way that every single one of us feels that we are marching right beside them. Amen.